Fernando with Texas United Realty. I'm one of the mentors. Wanted to thank you for joining me on this webinar. Today we're going to focus on quick guide on the progression of a sales transaction from start to finish. There's many of you who are new in real estate, and questions that will usually come up is how the transaction is progressing. Your buyers and sellers and friends and family will be asking you a lot of questions as to, hey, what's involved in the buying and selling of the transaction. So today on the agenda, we're going to be focusing on the prerequisites needed to submit an offer, overview of what to anticipate on a sale transaction, again, the progression from beginning to end of your transaction until closing. And then we're going to discuss the 4 phases so you can update your clients throughout the transaction. A lot of tips and Q&A, question and answer session. So the prerequisites, whenever someone approaches you or you're talking to others, potential prospects, they're always going to say, well, how do I get started in buying a house? Well, the main priority is they have to get pre-approved. So before your client can submit an offer, they must have the following: either a pre-approval letter from a bank, or they can provide proof of funds, which is a bank statement of all the cash that they're going to have to buy that particular property. Without this, either items, your offer will not be considered serious and it will not be accepted. So one thing that I usually tell my students, my mentees, is show me the money. So this is really, really critical. If people are wanting you to show them houses, and that's okay to do as a new agent, but eventually you're going to just say, well, I'd rather have you get it pre-approved, because you might be showing them the wrong type of property. What if they were approved for 200, or they wanted to see houses that are 200 and they're approved for 250, 250,000. First tip is the name of the pre-approval letter or bank statement must match the contract name of the buyer. So for example, if it's Joe Buyer who's going to be buying the house, the name of Joe Buyer needs to be on the pre-approval letter or the bank statement. It can't be somebody else's. So the buying and selling process, we have phases that I've created, and these really are helpful in understanding what's next in the buying and selling process. The sales transaction can be broken down with these phases, and it will help you to oversee the progression from beginning to end of your sales transaction until closing. The 4 phases are phase 1, which is the contract offer and execution; phase 2, which is the property inspection and repairs; phase 3 is the buyer financing and home appraisal; and then phase 4, which is what we always look forward to, is the clear to close. So those are the 4 phases that I've broken down, and it should help you guys as new agents or even some seasoned agents understand the process completely. So let's look at the first phase. Phase 1. Phase 1 is the contract offer and execution. So the contract offer is presented to a seller, and a counteroffer may occur, and that's where between the buyer agent and the seller listing agent, there's a sales price and terms and conditions that are going back and forth. It's almost like a ping pong table. You submitted the offer, they do a counter offer, and then you go back to your buyers and they say, okay, well, how about this counter offer? And you're going back and forth until there's an agreement. Once there's an agreement, the contract is then executed by the buyer agent or listing agent, and an earnest money, usually at 1% of the sales price, is delivered. Also, there's usually a $150 check, which is for the option period, is also delivered. These 2 monies are delivered to different entities. So the earnest money check is delivered to the title company, and the option check is delivered to the listing agent or listing agent broker office or seller. These checks must be delivered within the 3 days after execution date. So that is important. So time is of the essence. You must deliver these 2 checks immediately. And these are calendar days. So even if there's a holiday or you're sick or whatever, you're busy, you still have to deliver it. Find a way to deliver these 2 checks. Again, the earnest money check goes to the title company. The option check of $150 is delivered to the listing agent broker office, or seller. They're not delivered to the same place. Once you do that, one additional note is have the buyer immediately schedule the home inspections, because you only have about 10 days to do that. Here's a warning, and I put it in red. Do not mail the option check. It must be hand delivered. If the option check is not delivered within 3 calendar days, the option period will be invalid, and your buyer may lose their earnest money since you do not have an option period. So this is really, really critical. So as soon as it's executed, you need to get the monies and you need to drop them off. It doesn't matter if it's Saturday, Sunday, 4th of July, Christmas, there's a hurricane, it doesn't really matter. You have to deliver the money. Okay? Do not mail it. Very critical. So now we're off to phase 2. So we're completed phase 1. So now we're in phase 2. Phase 2 encompasses home inspections and repairs. So now the monies have been delivered. The buyer schedules a home or termite inspection to be conducted. This is allowed since the buyer paid for the option period of $150 to conduct any inspections. You need to ensure as a buyer, and of course as a seller, as a listing agent, you need to confirm that all the utilities are on. That's gas, water, electricity, and they will need to remain on by the seller until closing. So if it's going to take 60 days to close or 45 days to close, utilities must remain on. There are some sellers that say, oh, since they're already done with inspections, we're going to turn it off. No. Per the contract, it has to be on. This is a requirement within the contract. Typical costs for home inspections normally range from anywhere from $300 to $475. Usually the home inspectors, they usually charge per square foot of the house, so they may ask you what's the square footage. Another thing that I recommend highly is termite inspections as well. I mean, we live in Texas, so there's a lot of termites here. Typical range of cost is $80 to $100. There are other inspections that may be needed. So if the property has a septic tank, that you may need to get a septic tank specialist or inspector to come. If they have an underground pool, that's an additional inspection. And foundation issues, or if they find roof repairs or whatever it is, there's additional inspections that may occur. So the buyer, for the buyer, this is costly, or it can become costly, because they feel like they're constantly paying for inspections. But this is not closing costs. This is out of their pocket. Okay? If they terminate the contract, they don't get that money back. And if they start looking for another house, they have to start this process all over again. Okay? So if repairs are needed, then the buyer may need to negotiate with the seller and agree on repairs to move forward or not. The not meaning that they're going to terminate. And again, if they terminate, they have to start all over again with the other house that they submit an offer to. One thing that's very important as a buyer agent is to keep track of the option period timeline. Usually it's 10 days, and you have to keep track of it. You can keep track of it on your phone, your calendar, but you have to keep track of the 10 days of when it expires. Usually expires on the 10th day at 5 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time. You don't want to miss this date, and then your buyers can end up losing their earnest money because you forgot to keep track of this date. So please, please be very careful and keep track of this date. It's very critical. A tip to save some costs for the buyer is you can ask the home inspector, or they can ask the home inspector if they also can conduct other inspections like termite, pool. There are some home inspectors that bundle inspections where they do the home, the pool, the termites, so that would save them some money there. Once if you're moving forward um, as new agents or as tour agents, you have to make sure you turn in all the paperwork for your transaction to your mentor if you have one, or if you don't have a mentor and you're as a seasoned agent, then you need to submit it to contract compliance. And it has to be done no later than 3 days after the option period expires to avoid late fees. Okay, these late fees are the first day is $100 late fee, and then it's $25 daily after. So it's really critical for you to turn in all the paperwork. This is if the transaction is moving forward. If the transaction is terminated, then you don't have to turn in all this paperwork. So that sums up phase 2. So now we're off to phase 3. Phase 3 is the buyer financing and home appraisal. So here we're done with the home inspections, where we've agreed on what they were going to repair, or that maybe they were going to give us money towards closing costs, or lower the price, whatever the negotiations, handshaking happened. But now we're on phase 3. So phase 3 is focusing on the buyer financing and the home appraisal. They're two separate things. They're not the same thing. An appraisal is ordered by the bank and paid by the buyer. An appraisal is assessing what the value of that house is, of that property. It doesn't have to be a house. It can be land as well. But the appraisal is ordered by the bank and paid by the buyer. The buyer may be charged anywhere from $500 to $700 by the lender. This is considered pre-closing costs, and yes, they have to pay it up front. Appraisals are only done when there's a mortgage. If the deal is cash, then there is no appraisal required. The buyer can order an appraisal if they want, but it's not necessary since there's no mortgage. Now, if the appraisal is not met, then you may need to renegotiate the deal between buyer and seller. So that one, again, you're going to have to renegotiate. Again, looking at phase 2, which is the repairs, you negotiate there. This phase 3, you may negotiate again. So essentially, there's 3 negotiations. The first one, which is phase 1, which is looking at meeting the contract, sales price, terms and conditions, and then the repairs, which would be the other negotiation, and now the appraisal would be a third negotiation. At the same time of phase 3, there's also buyer financing. Now, keep in mind, I know it's a little confusing, but you're saying, well, the buyers got pre-approved. Yeah, they were pre-approved, but not fully approved. The fully approved is where the underwriters within the banks or lenders go and scrutinize the buyer's financing. They'll check employment history and employment salaries and credit scores and look at all the debt ratios. I mean, they really drill down. So the buyer financing is scrutinizing the buyer's background of financing, and they have about typically 21 days, which is what it says in the third-party financing addendum. Typically, there's 21 days, and the lender has that amount of time. And the 21 days is from the start of when the contract was executed. So there's 21 days where the lender is, checking the buyer's financing. Another thing that you got to keep track as a timeline is the financing timeline. Again, 21 days. You got to set your clock or a calendar and ensure you don't pass this deadline. You don't want to miss this date, and then your buyers can end up losing their earnest money because you forgot to keep track of this. Again, similar to the option period. So those are 2 important dates to keep track of. One is the option, when the option ends, and then this one's the buyer financing. When does that end? So that would be within phase 3. Let's see, I think that's all I have here. Then the most exciting part is, hey, clear to close, phase 4. This is one of my favorites because here's where you're almost going to be getting paid. All the stress and anxiety from phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 has passed. You might say, well, what can go wrong? Well, like I tell my students, until you hear the word funding, meaning that everybody got paid or all the monies were transferred, then you can get excited. So, but clear to close is the underwriters from the lenders will indicate a clear to close to both seller and buyers. The title company will provide closing statements. Usually they call them the HUD or the CD. CD means closing disclosure, to all for review and confirm all the dollars, the cost for closing costs and how much the dollar nets are. And what I mean by dollar nets is how much is the seller going to get after everything is paid and closing costs. What's their net of that, monies that they're going to walk out with. And then, of course, the buyer side is going to be how much money do I have to bring to the table, for closing. Another thing that you do during the phase 4 is buyer agent will need to schedule a walkthrough either one day or prior to closing time. Here's where you as a buyer agent and of course the listing agent will receive the request if you're selling the house on when the walkthrough is going to happen. But this is where you can go and make sure that the house still exists, or maybe there was some repairs or cleanup or something that needed to get done. That would be your walkthrough process. And it's the responsibility of the buyer agent and the listing agent to schedule with the title company on times for closing. One tip that I don't have on here is it's best to close in the morning. Try to close in the morning, like 10:30, 11, 12, even early afternoon. Like that way you have time for the monies to transfer, because usually now we do a lot of wire transferring, and sometimes it takes 2 hours for wire transfers to occur and to fulfill. And you would like to at least have during the day that to happen, so like that you can hear the word funding confirmation from the title company, and then the buyer will receive the keys to the house that they're buying. You don't want to try to schedule a closing at 4:00 p.m. and then there is no funding happening until the next day at 10:30 in the morning. And guess what? Your buyers cannot receive keys, and they have the movers show up at 8:00 in the morning the next day, or let's just say it was Friday at 4:00, and the movers were coming in on Saturday at 8 a.m. Well, they can't get into the house. So try to schedule in the morning closings, or early afternoon. Another thing you need to make sure is if you want to get paid by the title company, because usually the title companies issue checks directly to you, is ensure that the approved DA, which is the disbursement authorization form, that's part of your paperwork, is already been approved by Rick Rogers, the broker, but you send it to the title company. That way the title company can cut the checks out, send you a check, and you get paid. The title company will start saying things to you as a buyer and as a listing agent. Hey, I need the CDA. That's what they call it usually. The title companies calls them a CDA. CDA means Commission Disbursement Authorization, which is the same thing as what Turk calls it. Texas United Realty, we call it a DA, which is the Disbursement Authorization. It's the same form, but the title companies love to use the word CDA, and at Texas United Realty we use the word DA. So it's the same form. If for some reason you forget to send it to the title company, or didn't have time to send it to the title company, or was not approved on time because the paperwork was late, what the title company does is they'll issue a check directly to Texas United Realty, and then Texas United Realty will then issue you a check. But then there's a delay of 3 days here and 3 days there, and I'm sure you're going to want your money fast. So make sure the DA is approved and sent to the title company. Okay, so here's some tips. The name of the pre-approval letter or bank statement must match the contract. Do not mail the OP check. It must be hand delivered within 3 calendar days to the listing agent office, or the seller. Ask the home inspector if they also conduct other inspections like termites, pool, Of course, you're not the one doing it. It's really the buyer who's doing that, but make sure the buyer knows. Make sure all the utilities are on. If not, the home inspector will need to return the finish the inspections, and they probably were going to charge you a trip charge, and they usually charge $75 to $150 to go back because the gas wasn't on, or the electricity wasn't on, or the water wasn't on, and they couldn't finish the inspection. So they don't work for free. They're not going to go back for free to finish the inspection. So they may charge $75 to $150, and someone needs to pay for it. I don't know who, but somebody has to pay for it, and they're going to be standing in front of the door waiting for somebody to get paid for that. So make sure that's confirmed that the utilities are on at the property. Keep track of the option period, the OP, and the third-party financing deadlines. Make sure you turn all your paperwork to your mentor or contract compliance within the 3 days after the option period ends to avoid late fees. Usually, Rick Rogers the broker will charge $100 for the first day, and then he will charge $25 daily afterwards. Make sure you send all the executed contracts to the lender and the title company. This may include amendments as soon as they are executed. So like that, the title company and the lenders are starting the process. When you're in phase 3 and representing the buyer, you will need to inform the lender that the option period is completed and moving forward. Lenders like to hear, "Hey, we're moving forward, and we're off to phase 3." Of course, they don't know what phase 3 means, but you can just say, "We're ready for the appraisal and the buyer financing to be ready." So I wanted to show you a typical email I use to update my clients on transactions. They really like these kind of emails, and one thing that they love about this email that I send them is that I reduce the amount of time they call me or text me or email me going, "What's next? What's next? What's next?" And of course, it gets kind of a little bit disturbing sometimes. So what I like to do is I like to send this this is a typical email, and actually this is an email that I actually sent on January 9th. I wrote here's an update on the transaction and next steps and phases. I've attached the contracts that you have signed already. There are other contracts. I'll send the contract to the lender. But here's the one that I really want you to pay attention to. Here are the next steps that we'll be going through for your transaction. Phase 1, completed. So I wrote on here, contract executed, delivered earnest money to title company, deliver option fee check to listing agent, send executed contract to lender and title company. Boom, done. Phase 2, in progress. Scheduled home and termite inspections for Monday, January 6th at 10:30 a.m. The listing agent has been notified and confirmed that all utilities are on, gas, water, and electricity. Once we receive the home inspection report, we'll review it together and discuss the options. You see how clear and concise this is. Phase 3, not started. Of course, we're still in phase 2. But phase 3, I wrote on here, appraisals will be ordered by lender, buyer to receive final approval of financing by lender. So now my buyers know exactly what's going to happen in phase 3. Phase 4, wait for title company and lender for clear to close. We'll receive how much money to bring for closing. Then from lender and title company, we will need to schedule the closing, and we will need to conduct a walkthrough 1 day prior to closing. I love these kind of reports. I send them all the time to my buyers and sellers. If I'm the buyer agent or if I'm the listing agent, it doesn't really matter, because this gives them an update of what's happening in the progression of the phases of the transaction. They hardly ever call me going, "Fernando, what's next?" Okay, so it's really nice to have, and you can use my template if you would like a copy of it. Okay, so we're done with the presentation. Hopefully, I know it was a lot of information to absorb, but you can unmute your devices and ask me questions if you would like.
So, Fernando, do you have that template out on the training folder anywhere?
Yeah, the training folder does have my 4 phases, yes.
Okay.
Uh,
So I'll find that
yeah,
email
yeah.
thing,
Well,
or I can make
it's a
something
PDF.
similar.
It's a PDF file.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. And actually, I use that PDF file to build my presentation. So
That makes
yeah,
sense.
and I'm the creator of these phases, by the way. I did these phases because
Okay.
I got so many people, my clients, seller side or buyer side. Fernando, what's next? Fernando, what's next? Well, there you go. Here's what's next. So I love these four phases. I'm very proud of them.
Good.
Any other questions?
Does does that file include a copy of the letter that you just had?
No, no. But maybe I can put it in there. That's a great idea. I can probably add it tonight. Um, but I can probably show. Well, let me see if I can show you the. I can. Well, I'm here for answering any other questions, but I'm going to see if I can um, look at the my because it's in the folder, the training folder is what you guys are talking about, and the training folder is where I have this PDF file.
Yes.
Anybody have any other questions while I'm looking for the training folder?
I have a
Yes,
question.
ma'am.
Do you have a template for a letter or email that you send to a buyer to remind them to file their homestead paperwork?
No, I do not have that. But that's very good that you're doing that because that kind of brings in assistance to them. But no, I don't have that. I'm sorry. If you want to send me do you have my email address? And I can kind of help you with that if you would like.
I do.
Okay. So I'm looking at, oh, here it is. Here's the training folder, and this is the PDF file that I was talking about. And you can just open the PDF file, and it has kind of similar things that I just talked about because I actually use this to create my presentation. But you guys can use it, and a lot of my students that I tell them to use those four phases, they love it because they're like, wow, this is great. But here's my PDF file that I have on the training folder, and then you guys can just use that as an email, and I give you my permission to use it. You don't have to ask me for it. But see, here's the buyer and seller home purchase phase, and it kind of looks similar to what I just talked about, and it's a PDF file in the training folder. And you can use this as the email that you send to your buyers or sellers. Just don't give them the dirty laundry. What I mean by that is exclude the things that say that you're going to get charged $100 late fee if you don't turn in the paperwork. They don't need to see that part. You know. Okay. Any other questions, guys? I hope this.
I'm good.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
I think somebody said asked the question. Okay. But anyway, here's the PDF file, and it's got.
I just said, I'm sorry. I just said I'm good.
Oh,
Thank
great,
you.
great. Thank you. I hope this helped you guys out. I know it's sometimes it becomes overwhelming, everything that you need to know, but this PDF document should help you with the four phases. That way you can kind of set your mind whenever there's a contract. You can at least go, okay, because I know buyers are going to be asking you, oh, when is the appraisal going to get ordered? You know, when does this happen? And at least you can have a guidance here. And you can talk to them about, you can talk to anybody about these four phases. That way that you can feel like you're in control of the transaction, of course. Okay. So that's the PDF document here. That's on the training folder. One thing I'm kind of curious.
Okay.
I'm kind of curious just to kind of Would you guys like to see examples of emails of different situations? Because I know one of them they brought up about homestead exemption.
I would.
Yeah.
Yes.
Would that help a lot? Just
Yeah.
because there's a lot of emails going, oh, here's an offer for my client. That could be one example. Another one might be an example of counter offers. The conversation of that. Another one might be, hey, you're a listing agent and you receive multiple offers for your listing. How do you send emails to others about that you have multiple offers for your listing? So that would be helpful if we kind of write script or email examples. Perfect.
I think so. Yes.
Great.
I think so.
Good. I'm glad y'all told me that because it's something for me to do. I appreciate that. All right, guys. Well, if y'all don't have any other questions, thank you very much. I know it's 9 o'clock and everybody's ready to, do other things. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.